First of all, you should be really clear whether, startups are for you. It's not for a lot of people. Let's be clear about that. We got listed in the online fashion 100, and they had some experts kind of give comments to certain companies. And we got one from BRENT HOBERMAN. His comment was exactly that. It was like, yeah, this could be huge for social networks. That did not work out. Probably mainly because I was a bit of an idiot. I didn't really know what I was doing. Your phone would go off in the middle of the night saying, my mother ringing or something, saying, oh, I've been taken into hospital. But they were lucky because they had investors who were willing to go with them. Because otherwise, how are you going to stay alive? Typically, they do not have these mountains of cash, enable them to weather a few tough quarters or even years. To get those breakout consumer businesses, it's just got to be something that's server meltingly exciting for people.
In this episode, I sit down with Dom Fendius, now the founder and CEO of Kiirsh, a tool that enables creators to monetize their own brands. But that wasn't always the case. Kiirsh is actually Dom's fifth business. So he brings a lot of learnings and wisdom from his previous 4 ventures into his current business and, of course, in this episode, which I'm so happy to share with you today. I hope that you really enjoy listening to this, and I really hope that you take away a practical learning that you can apply to your own entrepreneurial journey. As a bit of a trigger warning, he does share the very sad story about how he tragically lost his dad due to cancer. So if anyone has been through something similar or been affected by a loved one who has unfortunately been lost to a sad illness, then just a heads up, he's going to be sharing a bit about that sad story. Nonetheless, Dom is honestly one of the most positive and optimistic people I have ever met, despite these tragedies and despite the previous 4 failed businesses. So if there's anyone to share a glimpse into what it takes to be resilient and to keep going, then Dom is your man. Please enjoy this episode. Let's get right in. Dom, welcome to Strategy and Tragedy. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like you are one of the most perfect entrepreneurs to interview. You've set up not 1 business, not 2 business, not 3 businesses, but 5 businesses. Is that correct?
That is right. I've just counted them. So yes, that's right. And that's very kind of you to give me such a nice intro. Yeah, 5 businesses.
So let's do a rundown. So let's go in chronological order then. Business number 1.
Business number 1 was directly out of university. It was a free magazine called 21UL. And as I was just saying to you, I can't remember what that even stands for. I really don't remember that. That's so weird, isn't it?
The U is maybe urban. The L,
well, 21. I think was the 21st century, right? Because it was at the beginning of the 2000s. And then, I think maybe it was like urban living or something like that. In fact, I think that's it. Look, that just came back to me. So what that was about, I'd been living in Berlin for a year as part of my degree course. And in Berlin, there was a really popular free magazine. And it was just a listings magazine, like what's going on in the nightlife club scene. And then when I came back and finished my final year at uni, I thought, okay, that's a cool idea. But then what you also had was people like Vice were beginning to become quite big. And I think they had launched in London, but I might be wrong about this, but I feel like they were more of did they start in Canada or New York? Can't remember. Anyway, so they were doing quite well, and you would be able to get copies around, Shoreditch, but probably nowhere else in the UK. So the idea was to kind of combine those listings and a few fun kind of, irreverent articles, interviews, profiles. And it was just a small kind of pamphlet-sized magazine, which now sounds insane, right? The idea of a real magazine. But obviously this was it wasn't pre the internet, but it was pre the internet being ubiquitous. So that was the first business. And that did not work out.
How come?
Yeah, I mean, probably mainly because I was a bit of an idiot. Not that I'm being a bit unfair on myself. What I mean by that is I didn't really know what I was doing, right? I was whatever I was, 22 or 23, and starting a magazine. I mean, people do that and they're successful, but it was also because the internet had become this big thing, and advertisers were it's kind of difficult to get hold of for magazines. But at the same time, actually, and this isn't the reason it didn't work out, but my father was really ill at the time. And that definitely took the focus off a little bit, but I would never use that as an excuse. But he had lung cancer, and it was I don't know, people watching this, if they've ever been through someone in their family with cancer, it's quite a all-consuming thing, right? And it's, and that was very much the case. It was, you couldn't really be in, like, I'd have to rush up to the family who were in Warwickshire. So you could, it would kind of be a very bitty existence. And, your phone would go off in the middle of the night saying, my mother ringing or something, saying, oh, he's been taken into hospital. So, but it definitely wasn't the reason it didn't work out, but it also didn't help. And we can talk about this a bit later, but it's actually quite an important moment, I think, definitely in my life, but in what I then chose to do, because, it tells you that nothing's guaranteed, right? My father was quite young, he was 58.
Wow.
So, but it made me think, all right, I don't want to just spend my whole life in an office working for other people. So anyway, that was the first one. Then I did go and work in an office for other people for a few years because I thought I need to get some proper experience and some money. So I went and worked in the city, which, I mean, was in a sense good. I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't find the work fulfilling at all. I didn't find it that intellectually demanding, but it was a lot of work. And it just wasn't fun. It made me think, this shouldn't be what work is, right? So anyway, and this was pre-financial crisis. So it was, crazy times. People were just making ridiculous amounts of money. There wasn't quite the disdain for bankers that there is now because it was pre-financial crisis, but there certainly was, so we'd have protesters outside the front of the bank that I worked at quite often. And anyway, so that was a bit of quite a different thing to, trying to start your own business. And after that, next business was Stitch, which essentially we collected the best fashion bloggers' photos and we made them shoppable. So, you just scroll through a feed of people wearing nice clothes, and it's very much like on Instagram now. If you hover over the pictures, they would have the details of the products and you could buy them. But this was pre-iPhone, so it was all on the desktop. It was quite clunky. I mean, it worked, but it's much more of a mobile experience, I think. Or what I mean is it works better on the mobile. I did that. I can't remember how many years, let's say 3 years. Got some really good traction, got a load of great press coverage. I think I told you before, we had, I remember having a meeting with an investor, and he was going, Dom, you are going to be so rich. This is amazing. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. And it didn't quite work out like that. But we did quite well, right? I mean, we got lots of users. And that was my first real tech startup. That kind of gave me the bug then to let's get into this and let's let that be my career and my kind of path in life.
So why didn't this one work?
So this one didn't work because that's a good question. I think we were too late to and not anticipate, but to see how powerful the iPhone was going to be in terms of how the consumer behaved. And I think also, you know, we kind of got, because I wasn't sure what the direction of the business was, I got swayed by what a lot of other people were telling me, right? And you'd have people saying, oh, you should do this as, white label the software to other people, to Facebook, so that, they can plug it into all the photos on Facebook. And I was like, wow. And in fact, we got listed in the Online Fashion 100 in 2010, which was in Vogue magazine, the top 100 people in the UK in the world of online fashion. And they had some experts kind of give comments to certain companies. And we got one from BRENT HOBERMAN, who, obviously now is a huge player in the London scene and was the founder of lastminute.com. And his comment was exactly that. It was like, yeah, this could be huge for social networks. And so, because I didn't know and I didn't have the faith in my own, or what's the expression? The strength of my convictions, whatever. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. I was kind of thinking, yeah, maybe we should go down that way. And really what we should have done is we should have just built a monster social platform where people could upload their own photos. I'm not saying we should have become Instagram. I thought that for a long time. But actually, there are businesses that have been successful since, particularly around the world. And I guess most famous one now is, what's it called? Like to Know It?
Yeah.
Or Like to Know? Yeah. Which do something very similar. But back in the day, it was people like Polyvore. And I wonder about how sustainable the business model is for that kind of business. That was one of our major flaws. Because what we had was we would do mainly street style photos, right? And it wasn't user generated. We have photographers who would go out and take pictures.
Right.
And that we wanted to change that over time, but in the beginning, that's what we did. And, so it'd be street style. So a lot of it was vintage. People have bought them in vintage stores, so it's difficult then to find an exact copy of it. That wasn't such a huge problem. But it just skewed very much to a young market who were looking at these pictures. What does that mean? It means that the clothes are not that expensive, right? So how are you monetizing that? You monetize it through an affiliate model. So if someone buys, if someone clicks on the photo and then they buy the item of clothing, we would get a commission. But if that was back in those days, if that was Topshop, you'd be getting 5% commission, right? And it would be a top which cost £18 or something. So actually, what we fell foul of in the longer term was that classic cost of acquiring a customer against the lifetime value of the customer. It just didn't add up because to get those people to come and visit cost a certain amount, and then the basket value was so low. And that's different with, I don't know, someone like Lyst for instance, or Farfetch. Any of these big fashion players that have come out of London, they were more luxury, right? So the average order value was higher, and totally different business. But if you're going for the sort of mass market. So that was a mistake that we made. And we could have fixed that if we'd sort of moved faster and got it user generated. But as I say, that the user generated thing became exponentially easier with the iPhone. And we were just too slow, really. And we just didn't see, and that's completely my fault. I was not a technical founder back then. I'm not really one now, but I'm definitely more technical. And
So there's an interesting juxtaposition with Stitch, where on the one hand, the concept sounds really ahead of its time, because as you say, you've got the likes of like To Know It, and this is pre-Instagram, pre-iPhone. This sounds really ahead of the curve. But then it's juxtaposed with being too late to adopt the whole kind of growth of the iPhone and the apps and the mobile take up with it all, the user generated content. So it's kind of, the idea was there, but I guess this is where it comes back to your technical abilities and just actually implementing and adopting that more mobile tech for it to take off.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never really thought about it in that way, but kudos to you, because that's very perceptive.
So business number 3 then.
Business number 3. That was Genset. And that was a men's focused design e-commerce app, essentially. And so it encompassed all nice designy kind of things that you could buy, right? It wasn't just clothes, it was also furniture, homeware, accessories.
So you took the learning of the average order value from Stitch and the low value, like £18 Topshop item, to actually more expensive units. So that was one learning you took to your next business, which is interesting.
Yeah, and we didn't want to hold any stock either. So that was also an important thing. Not that we held stock with Stitch, obviously, but I realized you don't want to be in that game. That's like a very sort of capital intensive game. But we did do it a little bit, we got some items in, but what we tried to be was more of a marketplace where we went out to, say, good example, we had someone in Portugal who made like laptop cases out of cork. And we essentially said, use us as, your shop front, and then they did all the fulfillment of it. And what we did, we had a swipe function, kind of like Tinder, which was very new at the time. So I was really excited at the time about, this is the new, UI of mobile, with people swiping through everything. Because before, everything had been, it's just on a grid that you scroll through.
It's ahead of the curve again.
Well, I don't know. You see, it was quite a common thing that was being done at the time, actually. I'm not going to...
But it really was Tinder that made that swiping left and right take off.
For sure. No, it was after them. It was after them. Yeah. No, it was very much a response to what they were doing.
Okay.
Yeah. But there were like at least 2 other startups in the UK doing that. But we were the only one focused specifically on men. And I don't know if we couldn't get that one to scale massively. And I'm not sure even to this day whether that was because it was just aimed at men. And one of the learnings I definitely took was, don't just target men, because, men are really bad at sharing, unless it's something like football gossip or something, or, beautiful women or something, I don't know. They don't share like, I went on this app or whatever. They don't do it that much. Whereas women, we found, they really share. They tell their friends. And so I took that as a learning. But we couldn't get the driving traffic to download apps back in those days was kind of Wild West, right? It was difficult. So again, it always comes down to this. It's like, how do you acquire the traffic? And if it turns out it's more expensive than the money you can make from people downloading it, you're not going to build a great business.
Well, I completely agree with you, but I do want to jump in here because thankfully this is where the shift in tides has happened, again, more recently in business. I feel like we're coming out of this era of this growth at all costs mentality, where you do look at the unicorns of today and the big tech darlings, and revenue profit margins do not even enter the conversation. Ridiculously, obviously it's ludicrous, but there's that whole gaining market share, wooing the investors along the way, getting them to just continually back you. And then when you hit that point of critical mass, that's kind of their logic, then you can start to think about that monetization.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that mentality from the tech startup position? So we're now on like the second or third like proper tech business of yours. And both of those seem to they would have benefited from that market share sort of mentality. But what you've talked about is very practically, very sensibly, is CAC, acquisition cost, how to drive traffic. And it just doesn't work from a very sensible standpoint.
Yeah. So I think and I've thought about this a lot recently because I've spoken to some people who really just focused on building products that people love. And they abandoned any kind of revenue model, right? But they were lucky because they had investors who were willing to go with them. And obviously, people always look to Bezos and Amazon for doing this, just grabbing market share. But let's not forget, he was getting pilloried by the financial community saying Amazon's ridiculous business, never turns a profit. But look at it now. So what you've got to have in that situation is investors that support you, because otherwise, how are you going to stay alive, right? That's the problem. And startups only exist in the short term, right? Typically, they do not have these mountains of cash like old legacy businesses do that enable them to weather a few tough quarters or even years. So, but having said that, my thinking these days is just to build something that people will love, and a revenue model will find its way, unless it's something which is never going to be monetizable, and there are plenty of examples of that. But no, I think if you just keep building things that people love, either you're going to get the investors to back you, or you find some way of monetizing it. But if you're just focused on making revenue from day one, and that can work, but I don't know if you're ever going to build that breakout business. And that's always been my thing. I wanted to build something massive. Kind of shame inducing, makes people feel uncomfortable how big it is, that sort of thing.
Yeah, great.
Which, that hasn't happened yet, but that's what excites me, the prospect of being able to do that. And I think for those kind of businesses, and by the way, I'm never going to build an enterprise SaaS business. Well, I don't think so. I mean, maybe, but it doesn't excite me, right? But yeah, to get those breakout consumer businesses, it's just got to be something that's, server meltingly exciting for people and kind of catches fire in their brains, and that can be. Doesn't have to be something purely aimed at the consumer in a kind of, social network kind of way or Tinder kind of way. It can also be something that facilitates making money for small business people. I would include consumer in that anyway.
I love that expression. I just want to underscore the server meltingly exciting. I love that.
Yeah.
So we'll pick up your timeline in just a sec, but on the subject of having VCs to back you, were each of your businesses venture backed?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and let's exclude 21UL from the conversation because that was really
the first pancake.
Although, we were online with that, but it was very much an afterthought that it would be a web magazine, right? So, the first two businesses, Stitch and Genset, were not completely bootstrapped, but friends and family, basically.
And you had your corporate roles in between those. So
had the corporate role in between 21UL and starting Stitch.
Okay. So did that provide a bit of a buffer?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. And that was always the intention that, first of all, and it didn't really work out this way, but I thought, if I go into finance, first of all, I'm going to build up and network. That kind of did happen.
Uh-huh.
But I'm also going to learn about, venture capital. That didn't happen because I was working for an investment bank and working for a family office. So it's just a million miles away.
Well, you don't know what you don't know, do you?
Yeah.
So you don't beat yourself up about that.
But it did, yes, give me some money to, fall back on and take the risk with.
Yeah, great.
So, and those, I can't even remember how much we raised, but it would have been like, less than 100,000.
Okay.
And, I'm really good at conserving capital.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I sometimes cringe when I was doing some advisory work, seeing what people spent their money on that their investors had given them. And, I've heard so many stories about people buying flash Italian furniture for their office.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, you can't be doing that. You just can't be doing that. But the investors, I don't know why the investors don't clamp down on it. But anyway, that's, up to them.
I mean, you mentioning Amazon before and just connecting it with this flash Italian furniture mention. There's that famous story of how in Amazon they would use doors as their desks. Have you heard of that?
I have heard about that. Yeah.
Just as the reminder that like all that matters is the customer and how we're making money. You can have a plank of wood for your desk. It just happens to be a reused door.
Yeah.
So you can really take it to an extreme, can't you? But there's something interesting with that for just a moment as well, because I identify with you in terms of the risk appetite with money. I think likewise good at conserving capital, saving cash, but I actually, this is obviously your interview, but I think I've perhaps gone too far down that way. And it's one, the analogy I always think of is, going too slow on the motorway is just as dangerous as speeding. And so you do need, I think I could have maybe upped my risk tolerance a little bit, and you do need to have a little bit of that go for it, not be so conservative. But of course it's a fine line, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. And I remember having a conversation with someone, this would have been years ago, probably about 10 years ago, and they raised, I don't know, let's say probably less than 10 million, somewhere between 2.5 and 5 million. I remember saying to them, "Oh, what are you going to spend it on?" And he was like, "Well, I'm going to spend it. It's not just meant to sit in the bank."
Exactly.
And I was like, yeah, fair enough. But I think the danger is in the early days, you don't know where you should be spending it, because if you haven't found product market fit, then
you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Exactly.
Aren't you?
Yeah. So, and actually I'm saying more, you shouldn't be spending it on just things that are not super
frivolous.
Frivolous. That's the word. Yeah. But on the doors as tables thing, I've changed my thinking on that, and I do think a good working environment now is really important. Because if you want to get the best out of your people, don't be sticking them in a dungeon with no windows and just terrible chairs.
There's a fine line, isn't it?
And okay, it's changed with work from home, etc. But I'm in a co-working space now. I really like it. I get a lot out of it. I want to go in every day.
Nice.
Because it's nice.
Yeah.
Because we have free coffee. There's beer on tap.
Yeah.
The people are nice.
3 guesses which co-working space Dom is at.
It's nice furniture. The chairs are good. There's lots of breakout spaces. So yeah, I have shifted my view on that. Not that I was one of those people who would make you work in a cellar.
But appreciation for some of those less tangible ROI costs, right? Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So picking it back up. So we're on to business number 3 now, which I believe is the first time that you've actually gone into more of a co-founder relationship.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so let me tell you about how that started.
Yeah.
So I'd finished with Genset. It hadn't worked as well as we wanted to. So I was like, okay, let's...
On to the next one.
And I was kind of figuring out, what am I going to do next? And then I got this, either an email or a LinkedIn message from this guy in America who was like super enthusiastic in his emails. And he's like, oh, I've seen what you've done, Dom. I've got this project I'm working on. It's basically making smart clothing labels. So it connects any piece of clothing to the internet. And that would have been 2016. And so I looked up this guy. First of all, I thought that sounds kind of cool. And I looked the guy up on Google, and he'd been through YC before with his previous business. He'd done a cool business before that had got loads of kind of like A grade Silicon Valley angel investors.
Wow.
And so I was like, I've got to meet this guy. So I met him, and he's very, very enthusiastic and outgoing and super bright. And so I was like, oh yeah, let's, we sort of spent 3 months kind of getting to know each other, founder dating, whatever you want to call it. And we would go to, where was it? It was, where Cold Drops Yards is in King's Cross, but the bit above there, Granary Square. And I can't remember if is it Caravan, the one that's on the end?
Yeah.
So yeah, we used to go there the whole time and get overpriced smoothies or whatever. And then kind of work on the business. And then in the end, we were like, should we give this a go? Let's give it a go. And so yeah, we decided to start this business together, which was going to do what I just described, smart wireless clothing labels. And it was called App Apparel. And I was like, wow, okay, this is really exciting. He's super smart. He'd done some incredible technology. It was hardware though, so I knew that was going to be a struggle, right? And there were so many challenges, because if you're putting a chip in a piece of clothing, that's going to have a battery in it. And then you're going to put that through the washing machine. Even if you're putting it through the dry cleaner, I don't know how knowledgeable you are. I didn't know this. Dry cleaning isn't completely dry. There is a bit of water or, chemicals or whatever. That blew my mind, by the way. I'm stupid maybe, but I was like, what?
Felt completely deceived.
Yeah.
Why is
but
it
then
called
actually,
dry cleaning?
yeah, but then, how would they clean it without water, Dom? Think about it. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, so yeah, we kind of put together an idea of how things might work, and we went to a VC who ran they were a VC fund and a private equity fund who also had a small accelerator. That was kind of the way they did their VC investments, was through this accelerator.
They use that as like deal flow.
Yeah, and actually they used that to then excite the big, so they have partnerships with people like John Lewis and TK Maxx, and that the way they did that was to say, oh look, we've got this pipeline of startups at the cutting edge. So anyway, we raised investment from them, and yeah, I really thought that was going to be.
How much did you raise, by the way? Do you remember?
I can't remember, but it wasn't a lot. It wasn't a lot. It was a pre-seed round.
But
right.
How did it compare to your friends and family? Like
more than that.
It was more than that.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah,
so this is like another.
Yeah, it's another
level.
step up. Yeah. But yeah, so what we really managed to do well with that business is excite brands and retailers. Not all of them, by the way. I'll tell you a story. I won't mention who the brand is, but we met the C-suite, like the whole senior team, including the owners of the big retailers. And we were pitching it to them as saying, all the stuff that you can do in store, if you imagine all of your clothes in store were connected to the internet, you'd be able to, because it interacts with a mobile, you'd be able to get some kind of knowledge of, does it get picked up and taken into the changing room, or does it just get picked up and dropped? But what we could also do is we could have enabled people to pay on their mobile device, which would have disabled the chip. And so they could have left and it wouldn't have triggered the alarm, right? That was one of the things. And we did all the research into saying into how much queuing costs retailers. And I remember speaking to him, and they were like, the owner of this brand, or the CEO, whatever, I think it's the same in this retailer. They were like, yeah, but if they're queuing, that's a good thing. And I was like, I mean, it is in the sense that they want to buy, but it's not a good thing if the queue's so long that they leave. Yeah. And that was our whole point. It's costing you X million pounds per year with people leaving because the queue's too long. Right. Not them specifically, but we had a broad kind of, we found some research which showed that. Anyway, they weren't interested, but subsequently Amazon is building, other retailers building stores where you can check out. It's not the same technology. But anyway, so we managed to excite retailers and brands. But then the thing we couldn't quite find the value in or for was the consumer. And you need the consumer buy-in because they have to have an app on their phone.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the chip is just communicating with nothing, right? It needs to interact with an app. So we thought, well, what are we going to do? We're going to give styling advice. And that's the path we went down, and turned out it's quite a flimsy thing.
Right.
And it just didn't cut through. But we were getting close to raising investment because it was such a big, interesting idea. But ultimately we decided this is not going to, again, Brian, who was my co-founder, is exactly the same as me. He wanted to build a monster business, and we just couldn't see a way that this would ever be a monster business. So in the end, I think me more grudgingly than him, decided to knock it on the head. I thought, maybe we could do something, and maybe it would be different to what we're doing now, and I think we should carry on going. But he wasn't so convinced, so that's fair enough. And we decided to shut that down before raising the next round, which with hindsight is definitely the right thing to do.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. So then you went back into employment.
So actually then I really didn't know what I was going to do after that. And I was pretty down about it because I was so excited when I started that. And I felt like we jumped through a lot of the hurdles that you need to at the beginning, and then it had just been a disappointment. So I was quite down for a while, and I kind of, just what's the word? Moped around at home, going, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And actually, what I settled on doing for a while was a podcast. And that was really good because I just was speaking to people, and, I was curious about their stories, and it just reignited something in me. And I was like, okay, I want to get back into the startup scene.
Nice.
And I talked to a couple of accelerators about working for them, and I was really excited about that. But actually, in the meantime, I was doing some advisory work for an organization called Capital Enterprise. And they had a program called the Green Light Program, which helped founders get investment ready for their first round. And so I did that. And I'd never done that before. I'd advised investors before, but I'd never advised founders before. And that, I just loved doing that. And at the beginning, I thought, how can I be useful to people who are doing whatever? So I helped a diabetes app, an illegal tech AI business. And I was like, at the beginning, I thought, how can I help these people? I don't know anything about that. But actually, very quickly, you realize at the early stage, the problems are all the same. It's just the sector's different, right? So down the line, probably I wouldn't have been any use because then you are dealing with sector specifics. But at the beginning, it's all about how do we get the deck in the right shape to raise investment. How do you get your first 100 customers? That's okay. There are nuances, but it's pretty similar across the board. So I did that. And from that, actually, a couple of the guys I was advising were in WeWork Labs, which was the internal accelerator at WeWork, and I met some of the WeWork people, and they asked me if I'd go and be the entrepreneur in residence at WeWork Labs. So I did that, and amazing.
Nice.
So much fun.
Yeah.
So much fun in the pre-IPO, pre-COVID days of WeWork, when it was, good times.
Wow. Good times.
Good times. They had money to spend, and trust me, they were spending it.
I know. I went to a party where Mark Ronson showed up.
Oh, wow.
And brought
I didn't
along
go to
Lily
any of those
Allen,
parties. What?
I definitely got first-hand flavour for some of the WeWork craziness. So watching, what was the show called?
What was it called? We Crashed.
That's it. Well done. Thank you. You got it.
That's a great show.
It was such a, like, seeing it firsthand was like, I can totally picture. So that's exciting. Yeah. So your current business, was that born out of the WeWork Accelerator, or just your own thing on the side? So how are you now
again, so when I was in there, I was kind of thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to, carry on in kind of an advisory sense? Should I try and become a VC? And what happened though, I was talking to these people, and I was like, I think I could build a business that's going to be really big,
Do you think that this experience, sorry to just jump in here as well really quickly, but this experience here with the advisory work and being the EIR, did that help you to kind of lick the wound, so to speak, from these previous businesses?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you get really down when you shut down a business, right?
Yeah.
And it's incredibly tough because you put your all into it, and you think that that's who you are. It's not, but you think, oh, everyone's judging me on this, and that probably is true, by the way, but it doesn't define you, but you really think it does. But really, people get, no one's thinking about your failures for very long. They might sort of go, I knew he was going to fail, just to make themselves feel better or whatever, right? But the advisory work was the perfect way of building up the self-confidence as well, because people are coming to you for your opinion. And I was getting great feedback, because each session I did was, they had to give feedback on, and I won an award in the in the year I was doing it.
Oh, congratulations.
And their internal, so I was like, oh, that's good. I'm not an idiot. As much as, when you're down, that is what you think, right?
Of course, yeah, exactly.
So, no, it's really good. Great. But it also made me, I was looking for a project whilst I was doing it, because I had a fair bit of spare time, and I just stumbled across a problem which I thought, that's interesting. And then I saw something that was happening in China in e-commerce, and I was like, okay, that wouldn't necessarily work here, but there are elements of it that would. So the new business, Kiirsh, is essentially a platform that helps creators start their own consumer brands. So, our first client was a company called Jomo London, which is one of the ladies from Made in Chelsea, and her business partner, who's a celebrity makeup artist. And it's a sexual wellness brand, and that has done really well. In fact, probably going to do some more with them. Then we've got a load of other brands in the pipeline. But it's a really exciting time. It's kind of, very much of the moment, right? You've got a lot of creators who are starting brands. And by the way, I think there's lots of areas we can move into, which are not necessarily just that, but sort of social commerce, the crossover between commerce, social, and entertainment, because that's always been there, right? Think of shopping centers. That's what that is. Think of the marriage between, film and fashion, and pop music and fashion, and look at all the big fashion brands, the way they advertise. They're like movies or music videos. So anyway, that's what we're doing now. It's going really well. Very early stage. We raised a small round. yeah, it's going pretty well.
Fantastic. I'm so pleased for you, Dom.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. You've
Thank
got
you.
the scars and
Yeah,
rising like a phoenix from the ashes.
Yeah.
So this one now, so Kiirsh is venture backed.
No, at the moment we've got VCs who invested in a personal capacity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you've had is it just one round so
It's
far?
just one round so far.
Pre-seed.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll be going out for another one soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Exciting.
Very exciting.
And so sat here now, business number 5, as well as holding these various employment roles. You've worked for financial corporate, you've worked as an advisor, so you've got this really blended mix in terms of your kind of career history so far. What, I guess, if we look at the two sides, the employment and entrepreneurship, how do you think one has helped the other? I guess more specifically, how has your roles, either being an advisor or just generally, working for somebody else in employment, how has that helped you be a better entrepreneur, do you reckon?
That's a good question. The first thing I would say is when I worked in the city, I worked at Goldman Sachs, and the work ethic there is insane.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, insane. So
give us an example.
Well, okay, I'll give you a good example. One time I got in the lift, and the lifts at Goldman were really weird because no one would talk to each other, by the way. And yeah, some people, if they knew each other, they would talk. But yeah, a woman got on, and she knew someone else in the lift, and they started talking. And the woman who was in the lift already, she said, "Oh, how are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I'm all right, but I haven't been home in 3 days." She'd been in the office for 3 days.
Wow.
No joke.
As in like what?
Just working.
Bag under her desk?
Yeah. Well, I don't even know if she slept. I'm assuming she did. But everyone had toothbrushes there, fresh shirts and stuff. Yeah, it was an extreme work ethic. And I wasn't that kind of guy. By the way, I don't think that's the best way of working.
No, it's just a fast track to burnout, isn't it?
Yeah. And but it gave me the appreciation that you've got to work hard, and there's always someone who is going to be working harder. So that, I think, was really important to carry through. I think dealing with other people, because if you're doing a startup, it's often a very small team, and you do tend to hire people who are either your friends or that through acquaintances. So it can be a bit, you can get into a bit of a everyone's thinking in the same way.
You don't have chamber.
Yeah, exactly. So, but when you work in big organizations, it tends not to be like that. And actually, I saw a funny thing the other day. It was a meme on Instagram, but it was like, a 20-year-old guy in his first job saying, "Wow, I never expected my best mate to be the 45-year-old divorced guy." And that happens when you're in a big office. You're suddenly with people who you would never hang out with, and you actually get on really well with them. Who knew, right? So yeah, I think that stuff does make you a better entrepreneur, I would say, because you need to understand different customers people, anyway, right? Yeah, that's the most important thing. Amazing. So just being open to that sort of thinking.
Yeah. And one of my last questions is, or having already known you for a while, you are also one of the most optimistic people that I know. I'm really curious, where does that come from? And especially, again, this is now your 5th business. You've really been through the ringer. You've had your tough times. You've had all these failures and things behind you. So where do you draw upon to keep going? Is that just a natural trait of yours?
Yeah, I think it's just natural. I think my father was definitely very much like that. He was an entrepreneur himself.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. There are dark times in Dom's life. Yes, I did refer to myself in the third person. Yeah, but sometimes they can be really difficult to overcome if you're on your own. But no, I just think, maybe I'm just delusional. I don't know. I don't know. I do like life. I don't like everything about life, but most of it, I think, we're pretty lucky. And I'm exceptionally lucky. I do appreciate that.
Great.
So yeah, I don't know. I always think there's a chance round the corner. And also, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, I just, it's not that I have this kind of fatalistic sense that, oh, my father died young, therefore I'm definitely also going to die young. I don't, hopefully not, right? But I do think it gives you an appreciation that time is finite and you can't just be doing, you can't be living someone else's life. And obviously there's a certain amount of privilege that allows you to think like that, right? We're not all lucky enough that we can follow our true desires in life. But yeah, for me, I made that decision that I'm going to just keep pursuing it within, the realms of possibility, what I want to do. That can be challenging to be around, by the way. You should probably ask my ex-girlfriend. But yeah, so that's just my kind of outlook on life, I think.
Brilliant. And so closing words to any entrepreneurs who are listening to this, who have maybe had failed businesses themselves, or maybe if they're feeling a bit like, oh, in between, or how do I pull through, having kind of had quite a few of these ventures before, what would be your final kind of words of wisdom, your advice to them?
I would say, first of all, you should be really clear in your thinking of whether, startups are for you or the entrepreneurial lifestyle is for you, because it's not for a lot of people. Let's be clear about that. But also, failure is very sort of fleeting and it doesn't define you as much as you think it does, unless it's an absolute disaster, right? Unless you do something idiotic as well, or unless you're incredibly unlucky. But as I said earlier, people really don't think about you as much as you think, as we all think they do. So no one, they move on very quickly with their problems. And, I've been incredibly harsh on myself in the way because my goals have always been, I want to build a unicorn. And that I haven't done yet. But we've had amazing success in terms of how many people we got to use our products. We made money with all of them, not with App Apparel, but, had users from around the world. People have loved what we're doing. People who know about the industry and they go, yeah, this is something cool. So, cut yourself some slack is probably what I'd say. It's probably not as bad as you're making it out to yourself.
Yeah, funny enough, just on that, before we wrap, it reminds me of literally just last night, I heard about the story of how Megadeth were founded, which was, you may well know, this was completely...
I'm not a massive Megadeth fan.
This was completely new to me, but basically it was one of the group members was ousted by Metallica.
Oh, really?
And his goal was to build a band, was to build a group that was more successful than Metallica. Wow. It was a pure revenge thing.
Yeah.
Because he was so hurt and because, been kicked out of the group and never overtook Metallica in terms of any success metric. And there was this big concert festival where they were one of the headliners, but the main headliner was Metallica. So it was a very, even in terms of just the poster design, it was a very visual representation with Metallica across the top and then them underneath. And actually the success that they had in, if you look at them objectively in a standalone way, it's just they got to tour all over the place. I don't have all the stats, but they were still very successful.
Yeah.
But the founder of that group, or whatever the musical equivalent term is for that, never saw, it was very, there's this analogy here, never saw himself as a success because that goal was just so...
Yeah, you see, that's tragic, really.
But this is similar to what you've experienced, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've not built your unicorn, and so it's how all these other businesses are framed. But actually, as you say, you have enjoyed all of this success that's justified in its own way.
Yeah, and you think about how many people's lives you touch with these kind of products. And, even if it's just a little bit of joy that you're bringing into their lives, well, that's definitely not a failure, is it?
Definitely.
So,
all right, wonderful. Well, lovely note to leave this on, Dom. Thank you so much for being here. Pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, rate and review. It really does mean a lot to help this show. I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much again for listening.